Hi, everyone. This is Raquel.
Hi, and this is Jennifer.
Welcome to Madness Cafe.
This is a feminist podcast where we talk about women's issues, politics, and health and wellness.
And where those issues intersect. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to Madness Cafe. Today, Jennifer and I are joined by Nina Simons, who is the co-founder of Bioneers and a social entrepreneur passionate about reimagining leadership, restoring balance to the feminine and masculine, and helping to heal relations with ourselves, each other, and the earth. She is also the author of Nature, Culture, and the Sacred, A Woman Listens for Leadership, where she offers practical guidance and inspiration for anyone who aspires to grow into their own unique form of leadership on behalf of positive change. Nina Simons, again, here's the book. Nina Simons, thank you for being with us.
Thank you for having me. It's a joy to be with you both.
Thank you. Well, Raquel and I both very, very much enjoyed your book. Raquel probably highlighted and tabbed more than I've ever seen any highlight and tab.
Yes, all of the tabs, all of the highlighting,
Woohoo!
all of the highlighting.
What an honor.
But before we get too much into it, would you just give us a little bit of maybe your background or even your young life? How did you get to be moved to write this book?
Sure. Well, I grew up from a family of artists and always imagined that my life would be in the arts. And I fell in love with theater. And then I discovered how hard it might be to earn a living at the kind of theater I believed in. And I wound up through a series of events moving from New York City to Santa Fe, New Mexico, where about 3 or 4 years later, I was working in the arts and I met the man who was to become my husband and partner. And we started working together almost immediately. Through that partnership, I became reconnected with my real sense of mission and purpose. At the time, he was finishing a film about the politics of medicine and the politics of cancer therapy specifically. Oh, cool. I learned because people would call his home at all hours of the day and night after they had been diagnosed and say, "I'm scared to death, and I hear you know something about alternative therapies." And I learned very quickly that people didn't have any good resources and that, in such a vulnerable state, it was really important that people learn about the plethora of options that are out there. And so I started working with him on the film, and then he got invited to film a garden in southern New Mexico. And I went to visit that garden, and I remembered from my childhood how much the natural world had meant to me. And I fell in love in that garden with the diversity of plants, with how they were interrelated, with how my senses interfaced with them. It was the most beautiful garden I'd ever seen. And I thought to myself at the time, like, wow, maybe the Garden of Eden was something like this. And when I walked out of the garden, and the master gardener who was gardening it explained that the reason he was doing this was to conserve a biodiversity of food plants because our biodiversity was threatened. And this was way back in the late 80s. By the time I walked out of that garden, I felt like the natural world had tapped me on the shoulder and said, "You're working for me now." And I was just utterly shocked because I had no background in science, no background in business. And my partner, at that time, my boyfriend, I guess, went on with the master gardener to start a company called Seeds of Change. I signed on first as marketing director, and then I became president of the company. So I learned about entrepreneurship and how to write a business plan and raise money and all the things, and loved growing this business because I felt like I was in service to the diversity of life, which, as I understand it, is about as close to the sacred as I know how to get. So then my husband, who's also a journalist and writer, was researching, and he found all these amazing people who had come up with visionary and practical solutions for healing our relationship with the earth and each other. He was telling a friend about it in a hot tub one day, and he was going on about all these great people, and he said, but no one's ever heard about them. The friend said, why don't you have a conference? And Kenny said, I've never been to a conference. It sounds boring. Why would I do that? The friend said, here's a grant for $10,000, have a conference. And
Wow.
Kenny came to me and he said, will you help me make a conference? And I also had never been to a conference, which was the blessing of beginner's mind. But he knew that I had a theater background. And so together we started this thing that became the Bioneers. Basically, for 34 years, I have been co-shepherding this nonprofit organization, which has blossomed into something quite remarkable. And along the way, I discovered how important my gender was to my vision of what was possible for me. And then I discovered how much my skin color was influencing my life experience and how dedicated I became to racial justice. And also in the process, I have been lucky enough to learn from, I don't know, dozens or scores of amazing Native peoples and Indigenous teachers. And so I've become this student of nature, culture, and the sacred. And for about the last 20 years, I've been convening diverse women leaders to explore how we can co-create beloved community and how we can strengthen each other's leadership. The book initially came about because each year with Bioneers, which is an annual gathering that now attracts like 2,500 people a year, I get to write a speech. And of course, it always freaks me out because I'm talking to like 2,000 people plus more online. And I always feel a little intimidated by the people I'm in the company of. And I always feel really hugely responsible for what can I say that's going to have the most meaning to the most people. And along the way, writing those things has helped me discover what I'm here to offer and what my own gifts are. So the first book was just a combination of all those talks over the years. And then I was gifted with the opportunity to make a second edition. And I realized I could weave together these two parts of my life, where I had been convening women leaders and learning how to create the conditions for optimal learning, and convening Bioneers and learning from leaders. So that's how the book came to be.
Well, that's so interesting that you say that, because I noticed that some of the writing was almost like poetry. Were those your speeches?
They were, you know.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And some of it is poetry. It's written in a poetic form.
Yeah.
And when I write in order to read what I've written, I sometimes break the lines in funny ways so that it looks like poetry and it helps me know how to read it in the way that's truest to my voice.
Yes. Beautiful.
Thank you. But, you know, once upon a time, I was gifted with an assignment by a mentor who told me to walk in the woods as I do every day, and with every other step, to repeat to myself what wants to come through me. And one of my favorite pieces in the book was the result of that, of walking for like an hour, repeating and repeating and repeating. And when I got home, I pulled out a pad of paper and a pen, and it was like it channeled right through me.
Wow.
And I love that piece.
Well,
I have to do more of that.
You have to tell us which piece it is now.
Oh, yeah. It's the first piece, I think, that's written in a poetic form, and it's called Something into Morning. Yeah, I'll find it. It's in the first section. And now I need my glasses to read it. Hold on. It's
funny that we're talking about this, because that was one of the things that I picked up on, was that the way that the book was put together, it almost like, what came up for me was that it was similar to feminine ways of leadership, of bringing lots of different forms in,
yeah,
and presenting them together. So that's kind of what I took from it as well.
nice.
So I'm
Yeah.
really glad that we were talking about that, because I wanted to bring that up. So
No, it's great. I mean, I do feel like that old idea that was big in the late 60s and early 70s, whatever wave of feminism that was, of reclaiming all our ways of knowing,
Yes.
is really part of the whole deal right now.
Mm-hmm.
And the piece that I was talking about was called From Morning into Daybreak.
Mm-hmm.
And it was soon after my father had died. It was actually in the late 90s. And I really had no idea what I was going to write about. And that was what came through, and I love it. It just freed me in a way that, I don't know, nothing else has.
And are you going to read us a little piece of it?
Oh, if you'd like, I will.
Yes.
Gosh. Hadn't planned to, but I can. Okay, just a sec. Let's
Nothing
see.
like putting you on the spot, huh?
Exactly. Oh, I love doing things I hadn't planned. It's part of my chart and my nature. How will we ever see daybreak without morning? Spelled MOURNING. If we don't feel what hurts, surrender to its demands, speak the wound, how can we really begin to heal? When my father died, I felt the rock I stood on suddenly gone, my identity lost in free fall. And I'm going to skip ahead to who mourns these losses? How can we not go mad with grief? Afraid I'll start wailing, I rock inwardly and don't stop. Yearning to speak out, I feel fearful. The voices within me are at once so young, agitated, but also ancient, sitting stone still and calm. They know the words that must be spoken, but giving them voice raises quaking fear within me. I ask that the elder hold the young one, to lend her stillness, solidity, to offer her strength. How will we grieve for the vividly colored corals bleached white, for the animals brutally hunted, phone books, toilet paper, and newspapers? The crone wants to shake us all awake, screeching, "Don't you get it? This is no time for small talk. This is a time for myth making. This is a time for epic poetry. This is a time to tell the tales that will become our compass for the time ahead. A time to remember the grace and celebrate the magic that infuses and informs this world." So that's a piece of it.
Oh, thank you.
Thanks for asking. It makes me cry when I read it.
Me too.
Here's
pain.
I've learned not to apologize.
I actually just lost my mom 2 months ago, and I noticed that a lot of your book focused on exactly what I've been trying to tell people. No, we don't need to shove grief away. We need to feel it.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's so true. And, I've become convinced one of the things that I've initiated with some colleagues at the Bioneers conference is a grief ritual space. Because I've become convinced that if we had publicly sanctioned safe, multicultural, multi-generational grief ritual spaces in our culture, we could diminish the amount of violence like overnight by a huge amount, and we can't push it away. It's part of our human design, and we need it, and it strengthens us and washes us clean. And also, I imagine you must feel, Jennifer, like, wow, 2 months ago is very recent. And I remember feeling, I think I might have written it in that piece, that I was envious of the Japanese culture where they have a ritual of wearing a black armband to show for a year after you've lost a loved one, to show that you're in an altered state.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
It's interesting that you bring up ritual, because you talk in the book about the connection between ritual and relationship. Can you talk about that and why that's so important?
Well, I'm not sure if I totally understand why it's so important, but I have learned that it is. So I'll do my best. I first learned this from a Peruvian traditional practitioner who was brought into a year-long training I was in, and he did like an 8-hour ceremony. And it was extraordinary with about 80 of us. It ended at like 3 a.m. By the time it was over, everyone was in an altered state. And at the very end, he said this. He said, if you remember only one thing from this time together, remember this. It's 9 words, and they have steered me ever since. He said, consciousness creates matter, language creates reality, ritual creates relationship. And so those three-word phrases have been some of my inner compass for the last 20 years or so. And I've experimented with them a lot. And what I found is that, I was just having a meeting with somebody who's putting together a summit about how we can strengthen our relationship to the natural world and understand that we are a part of it, not apart from it. And she said, Nina, what have you learned about how to do that? And I said, because we are born of nature, I think we live in a universe that's multivalent. We live in a world that's fractal in nature. And therefore, because we are born of nature, if we want to heal our relationships with ourselves, our partners, our friends, or the natural world, we have to start with ourselves. So there are a number of exercises in the book that talk about how I discovered and experimented with how to heal my relationship to my body. Because, every day I would get out of the shower and all those nasty critical voices would be like,
we talk about it all the time.
All the time.
Right. So what I learned was this ritual creates relationship is remarkably true. And I have experienced it by creating a ritual of pouring love into my body with anointing myself with oil after my shower in the morning, or sitting in a group of women and talking about the differences in our backgrounds, and then creating a ritual where we wrote out wishes on pieces of paper and tied them to branches, and then we all burned them together around a campfire and we sang. There are so many rituals. Mostly what I've learned is that we can retrain our neural programming. We can decondition ourselves. I sometimes think of it as just shedding layers of culturally assumed crap that is not serving me. And it feels like a never-ending onion skin. But the good news is, if you practice and you come up with some way to find the words that express what you want to shift and do something in an embodied way, and then hold yourself accountable for doing it every single day, somewhere around 6 to 8 weeks, something changes. It may be subtle, but I've done it with helping to heal my sense of self-love or self-worth. And in circles of women, if we do a practice that I describe more thoroughly in the book, that we called compost and cauldron, where, you notice the thing you want to give back to the earth because it's done. And it's time for it to turn into mush and nourish something else.
Let it go.
Let it go. And when one woman says it, it works for everybody, or a lot of women. And so I think my biggest takeaway from all those years of convening women's circles is no wonder the patriarchy set us up to be in competition with each other, because we can accelerate each other's learning and growth and strength amazingly. And no wonder they were scared of that. So of course they set us up for cat fights and ranking, all that shit,
Yeah, there's a lot of power in women convening together.
Totally,
Yeah.
totally. And in women having each other's backs
Mhm.
and lifting each other up, because so often we can see each other more clearly than we can see ourselves,
Oh, absolutely.
I agree with that.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So is your book a book about gender then?
You know, what a good question that is. I like to think not. I
Mm.
mean, yes and no,
Mhm.
because one of my very favorite reviews was from a man who said, I loved reading your book because it helped me understand my wife and my daughters better. I
Nice.
was like, oh, sweet. Okay, that's interesting. And the other reason I would say no is that I believe that everyone, regardless of what gendered body we might be in right now, we're all in a process of rebalancing the masculine and the feminine,
Mhm.
and and reclaiming what is a healthy masculine and what is a healthy feminine anyway, because
Yes.
these definitions we've inherited are just crap, you
Yes.
know.
Because
I mean, they are. Like, they're superficial, they're stupid, they're hallmarky, and they're destructive, frankly, and they diminish our whole human capacity. So, whatever gendered body you might be in, we all have masculine and feminine within us, right? And I want to be able to pull from anywhere in that spectrum in order to meet this time that actually asks a lot of us.
Right. And you
So,
talk about that in the book too, that this is a time of the rebalancing, right?
yeah,
Of rebalancing feminine and masculine together, almost like a union of masculine and feminine energies, not just what people jump to of man and woman. It's masculine and feminine. It's energy that we need to balance. We can't just lead from one or the other
yeah,
anymore. Like the
yeah,
example of the bird of humanity
right.
flying with only one wing.
Exactly. And for me, part of what happened, I had this huge aha moment when I saw a film online called The Burning Times.
Mm.
You may want to put this in your show notes because it's free, it's dated, but it's really important.
Mhm.
And it tells the massive story in our human history where somewhere between 50,000 and several million women over the course of 300 years were systematically persecuted and tortured and burned for the supposed crime of being witches. It wasn't just in Europe. There are different versions that happened all over the world. And so what happened for me was that I realized that it wasn't just an imbalance of men and women. It was that our institutions got imbalanced then. Like, the practice of medicine got messed up because all
Right.
the midwives and the herbalists and the acupuncturists they all got persecuted first, and only the men were allowed to practice medicine. And the religion and spirituality got perverted during that time, and so did economics, and so many things actually got really warped towards this modern capitalist crazy ecocidal culture we've got. And it's, some of it started then, some of it started earlier. But for me, what happened was that I saw, oh, everything that's wrong in the world could be seen as an imbalance of the yin and the yang, of the archetypal masculine and feminine. And if we could rebalance those things in all of us and in our institutions, that could help us really give birth to the new world that we all want.
And that we need.
Oh, gosh, we need it. We need
Right.
it bad, right?
Yeah.
And soon.
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
no
And
joke.
yeah, and well, and you talk about in the book the idea of what we've done to women as a society we're doing to the earth.
Exactly. Exactly. Which is why women have become some of the most fierce defenders of the earth,
Mm.
and especially Indigenous women. Yeah, it's true. And in fact, it's true in very literal senses that I talk about in the book, like the extractive industries move in man camps to regions of the earth, and they rape systematically, they rape the women. The men all turn toward alcoholism, and they destroy the indigenous cultures while they're destroying the earth. I mean, it's really tragic. So it has to stop. Yep.
It's tragic and it's repetitive. It has happened again and again and again.
Yes. It's a pattern.
It is a
And
pattern.
yeah, I mean, that's why I named culture in the title, because I think we have to transform our whole culture. It's not enough to shift our politics. It's not enough to shift the economy. We have to shift the culture that thinks of the earth as exploitable resources, as commodities, just like men think of women as
Yes.
sexual commodities.
Yes, exactly.
Yes. Yes.
So you said, in what you just said, it was kind of a hopeful statement. You said, we have to shift. Do you have ideas about how that shift can take place? Like, what do we have to be hopeful about?
Well, here's what I believe. And not to say that I'm right or that I'm an expert. I only know from my own life, okay? What I believe is that change happens from the inside out.
Right.
And in my own life, it's kind of like I was talking about how we have to shift the relationships. When I had to shift my relationship with my husband because I was always competing with him and we were fighting like cats and dogs, what actually changed it was me learning to value myself enough to stand in total equality with him. And when I did that, everything changed. And so actually, my message is we got to start with ourselves, women, and we all have it in us.
Yeah.
And, one of the things I've realized, like, I'm a student of the value of the emotions, because I think that as patriarchal culture has devalued a lot of things associated with the feminine, it's devalued embodiment, right? Dancing, movement, and the ways we live in our bodies and our sensuality. It's devalued emotion. If you think about how Hollywood makes chick flicks, makes me crazy, right?
Yeah.
It's starting to change, but slowly.
Right.
And I believe we have to reclaim the value of all those parts of ourselves, of our sensuality, of our intuition, of our dream time, and of our emotions. And, one of my favorite teachers is a woman named Carla McLaren. And she wrote a book called The Language of Emotion. And I grew up in a family where it was never safe to express anger. So I'm kind of stupid about anger. Like, I just don't have a lot of muscle there. What Carla says is anger is your body's way of telling you that a boundary has been trespassed.
Yes.
Yep.
Well, that makes a lot of sense.
Yep.
And then if we think about it and think about the fact that every baby born in the world today and every human alive on earth has plastics in our bodies that we never agreed to, we should all be out in the streets. I mean, not to mention, of course, medical rights and abortion rights and all that, right? I mean, please. But, bodily sovereignty. So as women, we've all been culturally socialized, or not we've all, but some of us have been socialized to repress our anger. Well, we need it now, so we need to reclaim it. That's an example, as well as our intuition. What a fabulous gift we've got. But you have to practice in order to get good at it.
Right. Well, I think anger is seen as more of a masculine emotion. So the balancing not only needs to happen in the world, but it needs to happen in us as well. Right?
Yes, and I think that when anger is seen as a masculine emotion, it's usually conflated with aggression or domination. Right? And the anger that I'm talking about is outrage. And that's different anger.
Right.
So even masculine anger has been twisted. They don't have a healthy relationship to anger either.
No, agreed.
Right? Yeah. Yeah. Which is why there are so many poor incel men going crazy with guns right now.
Oh, don't even get started there.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yep. Hey, I mean, the earth's on our side, and she's a heck of a powerful ally. I mean it. I don't say that idly. I mean it actually quite literally.
Well, there's actually a theory out there that if we do destroy the earth, it will be the humans that are destroyed, not the earth itself. That
Right.
Of course,
earth
of
will,
course, she won't
The
be
earth will
destroyed.
regenerate.
that our earth will
Yeah,
continue.
she may take a few billion years to get over us,
Right.
but right, no, it's us.
Yeah.
It's our own survival for sure. But I think what's so essential is that we're moving from a me culture to a we culture.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where I just read this piece about the epidemic of loneliness in this country.
Mm-hmm.
And it was so painful to me to read that 1 in every 2 Americans has 3 or less close friends. I was like, oh, that's awful. And along with that is going all kinds of diseases and despair and suicidal ideology. And oh my gosh. So, how do we turn back towards understanding ourselves through our relationships with ourselves, with our ancestors, with the invisible world, with nature, and with each other? Because, for me, through the pandemic, the web of relations of people I know who I'm really close with was such an incredible lifesaver to me.
Yes,
absolutely.
Yeah.
I think it goes back to, I don't remember all 6 words, but ritual and relationship, because I think the people who maintained some sort of ritual, for lack of a better word, around their relationship during the pandemic, like maybe they had a family Zoom once a week, or maybe they did their wine tasting across Zoom, or I know neighbors who stood out, everybody down the street stood out with a glass of wine and cheered each other across the street.
Beautiful.
It was creating, again, ritual or something to come in community with.
That's so right, though. Ritual creates relationship.
Yeah.
It's consciousness creates matter. Language creates reality. Like I have a friend who stops me all the time and she'll say, let's come up with a different word for trigger, because we can all have reactions, but let's not use a gun word.
Great
idea.
Point.
Right? At one point she said, okay, let's do feeding 2 birds with 1 scone instead of killing 2 birds with 1 stone. I mean, really, there are all these crazy language things we inherited. I kind of insist on not saying guys to my women friends. Like I'll say guyas or women, but not guys.
You can just say y'all. Y'all
You
work.
can.
I'm Southern.
Except if you're from New York, then it doesn't work.
We'll let you borrow it. It's totally fine.
It's good. It's good. Well, you're lucky. You're Black and Southern. That really works.
Yeah. There you go.
It's a great phrase, though.
Yeah, it works.
Well, in your book, to turn it just a little bit, you talk a lot about leadership and kind of the distinction, again, between the masculine and the feminine in leadership qualities. I don't know exactly what my question is around that, but from my own experience, being a young woman, really the only way I could break into leadership was by really overemphasizing my masculine leadership skills to get the position. But then what I learned over so many years in leadership, that actually what was more effective, and I hate this word, talking about words and power and language, they always called my skills the soft skills.
Right.
They'd say, oh, Jennifer has the best soft skills. Go see. Right? It isn't really soft skills. It's more of heart-centered leadership is what I would call it.
Right.
Yes.
Right.
Or relational intelligence.
Or relational.
Oh,
yes. That's so good.
And what I found, Jennifer, was that when I first started being honored for my leadership, I didn't like it at all, because I didn't even know why I didn't like it so much at first. I felt like I hadn't earned it. I felt like it painted a target on my back. And I began to really look at what are my mental models of leadership. And I realized, exactly as you're describing, my mental models were all from this very hyper masculinized view. And I didn't want to be a top-down leader. I didn't want to be somebody who was dominating others in order to succeed. I thought that stank. And so I began a really deep inquiry. And my first book was called Moonrise, The Power of Women Leading from the Heart. And I studied because Bioneers has given me this amazing opportunity to study hundreds or thousands of leaders and see who are the ones that most inspire me. And so I wound up really identifying the ones that most inspired me and then seeing what patterns they represented. And it was a bunch of things, like instead of being leaders because of a title or because they had inherited wealth or they were tall and handsome or whatever, they were leaders because they were devoted to something. They were leaders because they had some inner connection to something they were really passionate about. And oftentimes they accepted the call to do something. And so that was one thing, was that their motivation was really different. Another thing was that instead of leading in a top-down manner, they led by lifting others up. They led by seeing their leadership as an opportunity to create and strengthen leadership in everyone around them. And there were all these things, like they engaged people where they were instead of inflicting a solution upon them. So there were all these things about leadership. I mean, I even have an example in the book of a man who was intent on saving sea turtles. And he went to an island, like in the Fijian Sea, where the adolescent boys would collect the sea turtle eggs. He started a soccer tournament that would happen during the sea turtle egg laying period, so that the boys would be distracted and would stop collecting the sea turtle eggs.
Oh, what a great idea.
Right? And he gave them something else to be excited about. And it was like, oh, now that's relational intelligence at work.
Yeah,
and a man can do it as well as a woman. So it was like that. Yeah.
So would that be
So
an example of heart-centered leadership?
It could be. I mean, another example that's a man in that book is a man who brought veterans back to Vietnam to make peace with the people they had felt that they had wounded. So that was really heart-centered leadership.
Yeah.
I mean, some of it was more spirit-centered, some of it was more heart-centered. I think there are as many forms of leadership as we are people on the planet.
Probably.
Just like activism, right? Like I used to say to myself, oh, I'm not an activist because I don't go out and demonstrate and get arrested. Well, that's a very narrow definition. And I've come to understand that writing is activism and speaking and making podcasts is activism. And
you're an activist.
Yeah, you are.
Yes, you are.
Well, so are you too.
Yeah.
And so probably is everyone listening,
Probably.
just like we're all leaders. I think we just have to claim it and grow into it and trust that we have what we need to meet this moment. Because, there's so much messaging that tells us we're not enough.
Yes.
And actually, we are divine creatures. We are born of Gaia, who is the sacred, in my humble opinion. There is divinity in every single one of us. And I don't believe we would be here at this moment on earth if we didn't have something profoundly meaningful to contribute. And they're all different. And parenting is one of the most profound forms of leadership I can imagine, right? But we have to reclaim the value in all those things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So maybe this is kind of a leading question, but are you hopeful that we can make the changes that we need to make in time?
I don't honestly know the answer. I don't feel like any of us can know. I feel like what we can do is choose day by day how to bring ourselves to this wild and precious life. My sense is that humanity has tremendous ingenuity and adaptability. We as a species do. So my sense is that some form of us will survive. I don't know whether we'll do it in time. I think that we probably have some more suffering and hardship ahead of us, to be really honest. But it doesn't mean that we can't face into it with joy and celebration for the gift of being alive on earth in this body, in this time, in this magnificent world, you know?
Right.
And bring ourselves to this. I mean, we can't really know how it's going to turn out.
Right.
There are things that make me very hopeful. I'm hopeful about the women who are uprising in Afghanistan and Iran,
Yes.
And in Palestine. I'm hopeful about, there are grassroots women all over the world standing up for climate justice and planting trees and defending waterways. I'm hopeful about all that. I'm hopeful that as we as women awaken and the men who love us awaken to the need to stand with us and for us, I think we can avert big catastrophe still. I think the window is closing. I think we're really kind of in the 10 minutes to midnight time. Everything we do matters right now. It matters if you sign a petition. It matters if you call your congressperson. It matters if you run for the school board. It matters that your voice counts. And I think we need as many of us as we can engage. And the good news is that, what I advocate for is doing it not because it's what we should do, but because it's the most joyful way to live our lives. Because I want to stand in defense of what I love. And what I love is life and mother life. And that includes women and men and people of all races and backgrounds and a lot of creatures who don't have voices like we do. I want to stand for and with all of that because that's an honor and a joy. And I wouldn't want to live life with any less than that.
That's beautiful.
That is really beautiful. And that is very hopeful.
That is hopeful.
It's hopeful, but it's also not false hope. I feel like we have to be honest about the truth of what is. And it kind of goes back to what Jennifer was saying about we can't avoid grief. We can't avoid anger. We can't avoid despair. We have to feel those things in order to go. Carl Jung used to say, you have to go through the dark night of the soul in order to get the stars in the sky. And I think that's where we are. But we all have so much capacity that's untapped. Part of my joy in living my life and offering my book and doing the work that I do is to invite everyone to join me because, it's too much fun here and I want company and we need you. And why not? Take the risk. It's worth it.
Absolutely. Take the risk for sure.
Well, I love being with you two. Gosh, you're a gas.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And I'm so glad to get you both in the same state and together.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we want more people to read your book,
Good.
And find their own ways of being leaders and take from the book that everyone can be a leader, that everyone is a leader in their own way, and that we can all come together to save our planet and to save
ourselves.
Yeah.
Well, I love that. Thank you. And I'm going to be teaching some courses online, if I can just mention that.
Yes,
tell us
absolutely.
about
Please.
it.
Okay.
By the way.
There's all kinds of amazing resources on Bioneers.org, and I would encourage everyone to visit it. And I'm going to be teaching with a wonderful colleague a course in August on sacred activism. It'll be on the Bioneers Learning site. Okay. And you can find that if you join the newsletter at Bioneers, you'll know all about it. And then I'm also going to be teaching a course based on this book, probably next January, but it's a ways off. So come join me and join Bioneers.
So
absolutely.
The book is divided that each chapter has questions. Will the questions be the course material?
The questions, yes, to some extent. It'll be 90-minute classes once a week on a Sunday morning with homework in between and a community place to meet online. There will be media offered as part of it, and some of it will be taken from Yeah, the discussion guides and the embodied practices.
Yeah.
And some of it'll be fresh and brand new.
Oh, great.
So yes, yeah,
That sounds very exciting.
yeah, I'm psyched for it too.
Yeah.
And the book is also in an audiobook, although in order to get all of the discussion guides and embodied practices, you need the hard copy. If folks go to bioneers.org/NCS book, you'll be able to download the introduction to the book for free.
Yes, people do that. Go to that website, buy the book.
Read the book.
Read the book. It's amazing.
Do
So
the
good.
discussion.
Thank you. Make a women's circle. Grow yourselves in whatever way you feel called. Yeah.
Any message that you wanted to get out there that we didn't ask about, a topic that we didn't cover?
The one thing that thank you for asking that. The one thing that I would offer is that through the last 3 years during the pandemic, I would have to say that my own appreciation of the sacred has been growing. And it's grown in a number of ways. Like, I have a sitting practice that I do every morning. And given how fast the world feels like it's speeding up, I treasure that time. I feel like it gives me this pool of sweetness and serenity that I can turn to inside myself whenever things get a little too crazy out there, which is happening a lot, right? So I love that. And the other thing that I would offer is that I got guidance at the beginning of the pandemic to select a species to be a mentor for me during the pandemic.
Oh, that's interesting.
Okay.
Right? And so I was fascinated and I thought, well, how interesting. Okay. First, I thought maybe it'll be crows because there are a lot of crows where I live, but it was too familiar. And I thought, no. And so I decided to practice listening for guidance. And what I got was this plant that's a really unusual plant. And it's called an Apache plume. And it lives only in the area of the country that I live. And it's, in spite of being in a 100-year drought, this plant, which has seed heads that look like, who's the woman with the pink hair? They look like funny, wild blooms of pink hair.
Pink.
And
Yeah.
pink, they're pink.
Yeah.
And in spite of being in a 100-year drought, the Apache plume has been proliferating all over the landscape. And so I studied it for a year. Every time I went out walking, which is twice a day with my dogs, and I studied it through its annual cycle. And I feel like I got all these transmissions of lessons in resilience from being mentored by a plant. So, all kinds of ways to experiment and explore what kind of rituals can strengthen us and strengthen our relationships. That's what I would offer.
That's fantastic.
Cool.
Message.
Mm-hmm.
It's a really
Thank you for asking. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing that.
You know what? I'm going to show you a picture. Hold on just a sec of an Apache plume. We'll go out with that. Okay, just a sec.
Oh,
Beautiful.
That's an Apache plume.
yeah.
Oh my goodness.
Isn't it gorgeous?
Yes. Yeah.
You see why it called me. I was like,
Yeah.
hell yeah, I'll study from you.
Yeah, that is gorgeous.
Well, it was
Ladies.
a really great conversation.
Yes.
Yeah, for me too.
Oh,
I
love it.
Thank you so, so much.
Yes,
And have a beautiful rest of your day.
Thank you for writing this book too. This is such a beautiful book. And
thank you.
I love the way that the style that it's written in and the way that you pull in so much in different styles, and you give shout outs to all these beautiful women who have done amazing work, and you shine a light on them as well. So thank you for introducing all of us to these
all of them.
Yes. Thank you for that.
My joy and honor. It's how we lead, right?
Absolutely.
We lift each other up.
Absolutely. And you have lifted up so many. So thank you for the work that you're doing.
Thanks so much. Have a beautiful rest of your day.
And now let's wrap up the show.
That went by way too fast.
It really did.
Like
I have thousands of questions.
Yeah.
There were so many things that I wanted to touch on, but
what was the biggest thing you wanted to touch on that you didn't get a chance to talk about?
I really wanted to talk more about moving from the inner work and the inner authority to the outward.
Yeah.
And she talked a little bit about that, about the relational starting with your relationship with yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it would have been really cool to talk about how that shift goes from inner work to outer work and what that looks like in practice. I think that would have been a really cool discussion to have.
Raquel and I are here. This is for the listeners. Raquel and I are here in Michigan. And today we had this day where we talked to two of our past guests. Mm-hmm. One did a meditation for us this morning. Mm-hmm. And the other, we're talking about having another guest back on to talk about some more of her work. And you're just talking about this.
Yeah.
And I was just thinking that all of these guests that we've had have allowed you and I, and hopefully our listeners, to begin and to continue to do this inner work. It's what every single thing has been about.
Right. And that's the through line.
It is the through line.
Is doing the inner work and developing the relationship with self, and that coming out and
be the change.
Being the change and seeing ourselves as leaders and activists, and all of us can be all of that.
Yep.
And we just have to see it in ourselves. We have to do the inner work, and it just flows from that.
So like a lot of the really heavy activism where people are pushing down, trying to make change, they may be coming at it from the wrong angle. It needs to come.
Maybe it needs to come from within.
Yeah.
Well, and there's a quote that she touches on quite a few times in the book. It's from Cornell West, and I'm just gonna paraphrase here, people, because it'll take me forever to find it in the book. But it's love, or justice is love turned outward. Yeah.
Yes, justice is love turned outward.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's our through line.
Yeah. There we go.
Hey,
good job, partner.
Since we're here together and this is our last one together for a while.
Yeah.
Cheers, partner.
Cheers, partner.
Thank you for everything.
Thank you for being my partner on this journey. I love it.
I got tears. And it's usually
love you.
Love you too. This isn't wine, it's water.
It's just water, people. We'll have wine later, or at least I will. Thanks everyone for listening today. We will be back with more Madness Cafe next week. You can find us on Instagram at Madness Cafe Podcast, or email us at madnesscafepodcast@gmail.com. Bye.